Welcome. My name is Sheldon Subep, and I will be facilitating today's session. Today's session is the third and final session of our three-part learning series on design and systems thinking. Thank you all for joining us today, as well as for the other sessions that you have been joining. Um, for those who will be watching us from the future, because this is a recorded session, also a hearty warm welcome to you to this session today. Like I said, my name is Sheldon, and I will be facilitating today's session together with the rest of the SI Cape Town Hub team, Asen Gombe, Linda Kuvea, Boitung Konde, as well as Charles van Veek. Before we begin, just some housekeeping rules. If you do have any burning questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat. Because it is a presentation as well as a panel discussion, if you do have, suffer from forgetfulness like most of us, please just use the chat so that we can sort of pick those questions when it's time to have the discussion. All right. Um, so before we delve into today's session, I thought maybe we could just, give a little bit of context and background with regards to our first event, right? So in our first session, we delved into the fundamentals of design thinking and systems thinking. We learned how these two powerful approaches can be integrated to shape employee experiences, break down silos, and foster innovation within teams and organizations. Uh, we discussed the human systems canvas and the company culture iceberg model, which brought out a different perspective in thinking about organizational effectiveness, innovation at a systemic level. This session laid sort of the groundwork for the practical application of program design specifically for organizations. And then we moved over to the second event, which was a case study, right? And in this case study, we took a little bit of a deeper dive into the practical application of design thinking and systems thinking through a case study specifically at a mine, right? So Boitung Konde presented a real world example, insights on how these practices in design thinking work within teams and organization. This case study highlighted insights such as interconnectedness, synthesis, emergence, as well as feedback loops that are sort of forming part of that design and systems thinking integration within organizations. We also looked at an interesting sort of a concept of working um, working and leading from the balcony as well as leading from the dance floor, detailing that ability of leaders to be able to zoom in and out of specific uh, organizational problems, those multiple perspectives that sort of sometimes would be required, especially if you're trying to solve for a complex organizational problem. All right. So those sort of were some of the building blocks to today's session, which then brings together uh, two experts in the field of design thinking as well as systems thinking that will then give us a practical um, approach from their unique organizational or not organizational rather, but different perspectives that they sort of work in. I just want to share my Miro board. Just give me a minute. Okay, there we go. So today's session really is, like I said, is trying to understand how systems influence design, and we have a few sort of key concepts and topics that we would like to address, such as design thinking in complex contexts, systemic approaches, the socio-economic role of design, and success stories and challenges that the panelists both sort of experienced, trying to implement these kind of um, thinking and approaches specifically to complex problems. Okay, so it is my honor to introduce today's speakers. We are in a good company today with Mr. Dennis Abuela, who is a strategist in the area of design thinking and systems design, who will be talking about linkages between design thinking as well as systemic design. And then we also have Lavinia Puramel, who is a PhD candidate in ecology and land systems, who will be specifically talking about, or her presentation topic is basically from thinking to action and vice versa. Maybe if you can just unmute yourself and say hi to the team.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Lavinia Perumal, not with a U in the middle, but yeah, I'm excited to be here and really just learn and engage with everyone here. So nice to be here.
Welcome.
Good. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Dennis Abuela. Right now I'm in Kigali, Rwanda, normally based in Nairobi, Kenya. Glad to be here with you.
Okay, thank you very much. So without any further ado, what I'm going to do is just go into introduce the speakers one by one, and then they will go in and give their presentation. And after that, once everybody has, the both of them have given their presentation, we will then, open the floor for any questions and a sort of discussion based on what came out of their presentations. Okay, so I am going to start off with Mr. Dennis Abuela. So Dennis is an experienced systems thinking and design thinking practitioner and trainer with a strong background in systems engineering and strategy, with a proven track record in management consulting. He is skilled and certified in various areas, including service design, design thinking, strategy, balanced scorecard, enterprise risk management, information systems, change management, quality management, business model, and innovation. Quite a mouthful, and I think with all of that experience, we are really in for a treat with regards to his presentation. What I think left to mention here is that he is also a farmer. So really, he is wearing multiple hats today. Okay, so without any further ado, I would give it over to Mr. Dennis to then share your screen and present your part of the session.
Okay, so thank you, thank you, Sheldon. So I'm going to share my screen. Just a minute, give me a minute. Okay, so can you all see that?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about the linkages between design thinking and systemic design. I believe you all know what design thinking is and systemic design is all about. Systemic design basically is the convergence of systems thinking and design thinking, and I'll explain how that works. System design, of course, is about understanding relationships so that we get to achieve a desired results. And design thinking, as you all know, is basically about applying human-centered design so that we approach any problem, any policy design, any service design from the perspective of those who are meant to benefit from it. So the way in which I'll talk about this is in relation to a project that I'm currently working on in the area of strategy. Okay. That project has to do with developing city management offices for devolved cities within the Republic of Rwanda. So Rwanda, as you know, has the capital, which is Kigali. And previously, what was happening is that because the rest of the country was not very well developed, the youth within the country would tend to come to Kigali looking for jobs. And of course, that then put a lot of pressure on Kigali. Now, there are areas in Rwanda that have unique attributes. For example, you know about the Virunga Mountains where we have the gorillas. There's the area that borders with the Republic of Congo. There's another area that borders with the Republic of Uganda. So the government then recognized that if they were to set up what they refer to as secondary cities in each of those areas, then that would create urbanization, and then those who then, the youth that needed to be looking for jobs would instead be attracted to those cities rather than coming to Kigali. So that in itself then would relieve pressure of Kigali. But most importantly, they would also act as economic hubs in each of those areas. So in that sense, develop those areas as economic zones. Okay, so there are 6 of such cities that were identified, and that's a project that you're doing, developing the city management offices, basically to manage each of those secondary cities. Okay. Now, the way that governance in the Republic of Rwanda is organized is in 5 different stages. Okay. They start from what is referred to as Umudugudu, which is Kinyarwanda for villages. Okay. So a village basically consists of approximately 100 households. Now, those villages then join up to form what's referred to as a cell, which in Kinyarwanda is a kagari, and in total there are about 14,837 in the whole of Rwanda. The cells then at a higher level join up to form what are sectors, which in Kinyarwanda is umurenge. And again, in Kinyarwanda, there are a total of 2,148 such cells. Then the sectors form districts. Districts in Kinyarwanda is akarere, and in total there are 416 such sectors. Then in every district, rather, there are a total of 6 provinces within the country, combining groups of districts, and in total there are about 4 different provinces. So that's how the governance system in Rwanda is organized. But also what that means is that at every level, of course, there are interests of the people within that locality. So at the village, of course, there are village interests that must be met. At the cell level, again, there are cell interests that must be met. And each of those units elect their representatives to, of course, promote their interests. So within a district, for example, within a secondary city, you have all these units. You have villages that are in that secondary city. You have cells, you have sectors, and then you have the secondary city is part of a district. So when you're designing strategy or urban planning for that secondary city, you must then also consider what the village interests are, the cell interests are, sector interests are, and of course, the wider interests of the city within which the secondary city is situated. And that's where now systems thinking comes in, because there are various stakeholders that you must deal with in that context. Within urban planning, of course, you have to develop houses, you have to develop roads, you have to develop water systems, that whole infrastructure. There are business interests that must be taken care of. economic, all those. So when you have that many people, each of them with the varying interests, there are bound to be conflicts. There are certain things that, certain interests that might be promoted by one stakeholder, which would go against the interests of another stakeholder. So you must then combine, find a way of representing and analyzing those very many interests, and look at a way of a solution, not a solution, but an intervention that would apply to all of them. Now, you're familiar with the sort of three ways of approaching human-centered design. You look at the desirability of an intervention. Is it desired by the beneficiaries that you require? I mean, that you're trying to address. And that intervention that you're trying to implement, is it feasible? Can it be implemented with the resources that you have and with the time that you have, etc.? And once it is implemented, would it be viable in terms of course, the finances they get out of it, the economic development, all those. So that normally applies within the context of single users or a small group of users. When it gets to a complex system, such as the one that you're dealing with, then we modify that a bit, okay? Because now you're looking at all the interests of all those different levels. Remember, they're the villages, they are the cells, they're the sectors, and then the actual city or district that you're looking at. And beyond that, there's the national interest and possibly the regional interest. Rwanda is part of the East African region. So of course, you must also then consider the regional interests. So if you look at this chart that I'm currently displaying, you will see that there's still those three aspects. There's the desirability aspect, there's the feasibility aspect, and there's the viability aspect. Now, layered on that, of course, is concentric rings that represent each of those different levels. If you look at each of those multicolored circles, you'll see like the darker one, the innermost one, represent the village interests. The one immediately around it would represent the cell interest, what you're referring to as a kagari. Remember, the Kinyarwanda, they're called a kagari. And in this case, they combine the interests of the cell and the district. If you go slightly above that, you are now looking at the interests of the city management office that you're designing for, but also the broader context in which the city will exist. You're looking at the interests of the district and the national, and beyond that, the regional aspects that would inform what it is that the value that it is that the city management office will bring. Okay, so in terms of feasibility, for example, at the village level, you're focusing on the individual enterprise of each household. What is it that a household can do to successfully implement an intervention? Okay. As you go out to the cell level, the domain immediately above the village, then you're looking at how can the different villages organize themselves in terms of course, looking at synergies that they get as a village to then implement a certain intervention. If you as you expand out further, now looking at our whole sector, a sector, remember, is what forms a district or a whole district, then you're looking at forming different consortia that would help you to implement that intervention. The same applies with desirability and viability. Viability at the cell level, at the village level and cell level, to look at the financial benefits and economic benefits that accrue to a household. At the sector level, you're looking at the indirect financial benefits, looking at the industries that maybe will be created around within that cell that would benefit the households within the sector. Further out, you begin focusing on things like environmental, social, and governance systems. And at a much wider scale, at the national, regional, or district level, you're looking at that intervention that you are applying. How can it make the whole country resilient, say, against certain economic downturns or financial difficulties that the whole country would face? Okay, so that's how then you combine complexity systems thinking, looking at the broader system in which whatever it is that you're implementing, the different stakeholders that come into play, the different interests, how they affect the system, and combine that, of course, with the normal, usual design thinking way of approaching things. So this slide then details how desirability, feasibility, and viability come into play in a complex system. So in terms of desirability, you're considering what is desired by the citizens, but going beyond that, the human needs to take into account the needs of all participants in the naturally balanced ecosystem. We are focusing on the ecosystems in which the city management will exist. Okay, so we are looking at interdependencies. We are looking at how individual concerns, how the intervention that we're creating, how that affects the individuals. How will it affect the sectors within which those villages exist? At a higher level, of course, you're looking at the whole combined needs of the whole country. But a very significant thing is that whatever applies at a higher level must also make sense at the micro level. Okay, so for something to be desirable at the national level, it must also be desirable at the village level. So that way, then desirability applies at all the different levels that you're looking at. So does feasibility, and so does viability. Okay, so that's the short presentation that I wanted to make, just to present to you how you can combine design thinking and systems thinking. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was really insightful. I think, listening to you, you can really see how you really included the entire system to be able to, decide where you want to operate and how to sort of include everyone. I think the framework really speaks for itself, right? It's all inclusive at multiple levels within the problem that you are faced with. So I do have a few questions that I have jotted down. I hope everybody else has also some questions we can sound off in the chat room as well. But I want to for the sake of time, give Lavinia an opportunity to also just give her 15 cents, for a lack of a better word. So I would now want to just quickly give a brief description and introduction to her. So Lavinia is a versatile individual bridging ecological research and design thinking to drive societal impact. Pursuing a PhD in ecology, she excels in coordinating projects and facilitating research, fostering collaborative solutions within the natural world. As a skilled design thinking coach, Lavinia empowers people to turn ideas into action, addressing real societal needs. Passionate about knowledge sharing, she bridges research and application, equipping others to create valuable insights for society. With a vision of integrating ecology and design thinking, Lavinia envisions a future where creating and sustainable solutions tackle challenges head on. Okay, so it is over to you, Lavinia, to give us your presentation.
Yeah, thank you, Sheldon. That was, again, very generous. um, I shall start. Um, okay. Yeah, my title for today, I struggled with the title, but it's basically so from how do we move from thinking to action, and how do we go back and do it again. So yeah, I think, you know, we've sort of covered in previous sessions, and I think Dennis has done quite well as well to like really bring to life what some of these things mean. I think the thing here for me to highlight is um, so this is my experience with design and my experience with systems thinking. And I think I sit in a space between research and implementation. So I spend a lot of my life in academia, I guess. Um, and so a lot of it has been thinking. And we're slowly moving into the doing phases. But something that stood out for me between design and systems is this mindsets. So whatever we do it with some mindsets. And those mindsets involve us being able to tolerate ambiguity, uncertainty, to be curious in both cases, in both types of thinkings. There is some difference, you know, in systems thinking, there are paradoxes and there's emergence, and you know, that's not to say there isn't complexity in all these things in design. The other thing was that design seems to be, from my perspective, a way to generate sort of solutions, whereas systems as for a while been, how do we approach and start to think about a problem? Um, and so design very much can be, you know, parts without a whole, whereas systems is trying to see how these different parts interact to form within the whole, and then how that whole actually interacts with society and the wider context. And traditionally design has been, you know, for products, whereas systems in my use has been, you know, mostly for understanding, identifying, predicting. um, and again, I think design thinking for me seems to be much simpler in practice than systems thinking does. And with design, there's a user, and with systems, there are almost mechanisms and interventions that arise. Um, so just some of my experience with using design thinking. So I'm a design thinking coach at the D School Africa, which operates from Cape Town but throughout the continent. And they have their specific process, which is quite similar across the world, just a few variations, but they have two phases, or two, you know, two sort of sections within this process. And the first is dealing with a problem, and the second part of the process is to deal with a solution. So we take teams through a process to each of these phases, in which they tackle and try to understand the problem, and then they try to develop a solution. And throughout that process, we encourage a certain set of mindsets, and we have all these activities and these tools that we use to take them along through this journey. Um, and as an example, what we've done, so I do a lot of climate and development work, and we were tasked with going to the Eastern Cape, which is it's a mostly rural province here in South Africa, and they struggle with water insecurity. So they don't receive enough water, and then when they do receive water, they don't have enough infrastructure. So we hosted a bit of a session. We called people together, and it was very much, how can we start to tackle this challenge? And we spent some time in the problem space, trying to understand the problem. And then with design, as you know, there's always a user. So we interviewed people, we got some perspectives. We tried to dig deeper and find out what the needs of the people that are facing this water insecurity actually are. And it was a light touch just to expose people to design thinking. And you can see something that came up there was a quick sort of prototype of what this team did. Was they came up with this desalination plant within the specific community within the Eastern Cape. And then they spoke about all the different parts of it and the features of this product essentially. And so that's sort of what it looked like for us, and that's how I sort of practice and coach design thinking. And the next is a bit of how I practice systems thinking. And for me, it's not as straightforward with systems thinking. And this is some of my work from my PhD. For example, we started with a problem rather than a specific challenge that someone came to us with, and this was research oriented. So we found that they were building all these big roads across Africa, and as an ecologist and many other ecologists, they were worried because when you build roads, we'll start to see land change, and when we start to see land change, that might mean we might lose some of our natural ecosystems. So all of this was all in well and not really proven, but very much scientists were, carrying on about that, we shouldn't build these roads because we might have these things. And so for the first time, we said, okay, how can we try and see whether these roads might actually do what we say they're doing? And only to find out that, the impacts of the roads are quite complex. And so we do a lot of analysis and try and see what the underlying mechanisms through which these impacts come about. And then we try and map and identify and quantify and make links to see what is actually happening. So what's the story that's emerging? And what we found was that, for example, these big roads, when we put them in, they will have a lot of impacts, on the animals, on nature. But what sort of emerged was that roads are actually these like catalysts for change. What happens when you put a road in is a road provides access to a market, for example. This is just one example. And when people have access to markets, we start to see that they invest in agriculture. So then we'll start to see more expansion of farms or more deforestation because people have access to areas that they didn't have access to. So what I started off with and what I found was quite different from what we expected. And, one might say, okay, but then where's the intervention here? Because with design, you have a sort of intervention. And here it was mostly just a finding of what is happening. And what would be nice is to sort of then say to governments and road developers, how can we better design roads and which areas should we avoid based on what we've been finding? And so this has been mostly what my systems thinking has been about. And I think, it's nice that Dennis already touched on it, but then I started like thinking about more systemic design. And it's hard because there's no method, right? There's no, with design, I have a method. I'm a coach and I use a method. With systems, I stay in the research domain. But then what we're saying is we want to design something. So we want something by the end of this. And they're very careful to say, be careful with methods, because everything is so different and we should leave room for what might emerge. And having too much structure might not allow that. But again, we're saying here that, we can't always, is systemic design for more wicked, complex problems? Is design maybe for a different part, a different kind of problem? And we can see here that like the simple, like the Rubik cube is yes, it's a tough thing to come up with, but it's a single solution, right? And then we have a complex mess where we this bunny needs to raise this litter within all these different conditions, and each one has their own requirements, and so the problem becomes a bit more complex and ambiguous. So maybe not always systemic design, but I definitely think that there is a need to bring the both together, because with systems there's a bit of lack of action, and then with design there's a bit of sometimes a very light touch on what the context is within what you're designing. And so a lot of the time there are unintended consequences of what we do. So I was playing around with this and I tried to think, okay, if I know this design process, here's my design process from understand point of view. We have this sort of problem space, and then we have the solution space. And I think the thing that's lacking in design thinking, and maybe systems thinking, is this ethics. Because as a designer, there should be ethics. Because you design things, and very often you don't fully know the consequences of what you're designing. And then there should be principles, and then there are the mindsets. Like, let's still tolerate the ambiguity and the uncertainty, but let's ensure that what we're designing is like Dennis said, so it's sustainable, it's viable, feasible, desirable, but also, can we make sure it's sustainable? What are the unintended consequences of designing this road? What is going to happen to natural systems? Because what happens to natural systems then impacts what happens to people. So we need to keep thinking about these things. And my perspective would be doing a bit of a light systems thinking touch in the beginning of design thinking, and then at the end of design thinking, coming back and saying, how does what we're building, how do we embed it within a system? Because very often we design this thing again, but we don't really know how well this thing fits within the system in which we're designing it for. And then let's come back and monitor, because we should always be monitoring and improving. And so just, yeah, I mean, wrapping up here, I think, I like this thing here because it says, and I think I'm a budding systemic designer. I'm by no means an expert, but we know it's not a linear process, and they have this nice field guide, and they tell you that, make it work for you, adapt it, because it should very much be your own thing. Because I think a lot of what drives systemic design and like I'll say here, is there's value in connecting the both types of thinking, but we do need a framework to guide us, at least for myself. I need a bit of a framework that starts to bring these two together and lets me see how I'm using it. But systemic design is, again, it's not what we do, so it's not about the end product. It's also about how we do it, about who is involved in it, and what are the mindsets and underlying principles. So it's very much, it could be a circle, like Dennis had showed us, like what kind of lens how do you look at something, and it could be in a very different way, because we want to do things differently. So it means we need to engage differently. Maybe we need to engage more with the people that use these things. Maybe they need to be the designers, and I think something personally for me is that I've always had this understanding that the way the way you see the world, will always, there's always bias, so it always influences the way I practice whatever it is that I practice. So I do bring that with me. Yeah, and so it's about actually being able to encompass all of that, and leave space for working collaboratively, and using sustainable principles, and being inclusive, and having a participatory approach. So yeah, I mean, that is my sort of take on all of this. I feel like it's still a very much emerging, I don't want to call it a subdiscipline or discipline or whatever it is, but yes, thank you for listening. I'm going to hand over to you, Sheldon.
Thank you very much. Many gold nuggets in your presentation. We really loved it. But I think the one thing that is going to stick with me is the roads that are a catalyst for change. I don't think I'll be able to see the road differently, because yeah, it has really opened my eyes to multiple opportunities and different ways to see what a road can possibly sort of contribute to a country, to a continent, etc. Um, I think we had a interesting point from River. I think he dropped in the chat saying, this is directed to Dennis, by the way. When there may be conflict or friction between any of the three, desirability, feasibility, and viability, at different levels. Desirable at a district level, but not at a household level. So, for example, is there a priority order to how to resolve those conflicts, or a way of thinking about dealing with those? I hope I did your question justice there, River. Maybe Dennis, you would like to just share your insights on that?
Okay, yes, thank you for that question, Riva. So if you remember that governance system in Rwanda that represented, remember it starts at the village level, then we go to the cell, then you go to the sector, and finally the district. Now, at every level, there is what's referred to as a council, except that at the village level, we have administrators. But at the cell level, there's a council that's elected. At the sector level, there's also a council that's elected, the sector council. And the district level, you also have a district council. So ideas for proposals for development normally originate from at the village level. Then, of course, they're pushed up. And as they're pushed up, they consider all those different proposals and look at the priorities, of course, taking into account the resources that they have and looking at what would bring most benefits to that lower level, okay? And of course, if you now go to the sector level, they'll be comparing the proposals that they would have received across all the different villages that would have presented such proposals. And then they only pick those that bring most benefits to all the villages. Same thing at the sector level, same thing at the district level. So that's sort of the way that they're sieved as they go up. Now, once such proposals have been selected, of course, based on the very fact that there was that sieving as they were being considered through that upward process, beginning from the village, sector, village, cell, sector, and finally the village district, that sieving in a way ensures that whatever would have been selected at a higher level ordinarily should bring benefits to the lower level entities as much as possible. So that in itself avoids conflicts. I hope you understand that again, that reasoning. Because you're sieving the proposals as they go up, starting from the village, you go to the cell, then the sector, then the district. And at every level, you're considering an intervention that brings as much benefits as possible to all the lower units. But of course, there are other interventions that are identified at the national level. Okay, that of course would also consider their effects all the way down to the village level, and at that level, there's also representation by all the different lower levels. So as much as possible, that then integrates the interests of the various stakeholders. And if there are any conflicts, then they're resolved at that level before it's actually implemented. I hope that answers your questions, River.
Yes, thank you. That's very helpful. I appreciate it.
Thanks.
So if I may, it sounds like the orientation is very much grassroots. Things are rising or emerging from the grassroots level and moving through the higher altitudes of the governance, as opposed to generating more at the higher levels and kind of being pushed down.
Well, no, I wouldn't say mostly. It works both ways.
Okay.
For community development projects, it mostly starts at the village level and works itself.
Okay.
But for national economic issues, the policies will be developed at the national level, which then are implemented all the way down. Yes. For example, the very fact of the establishment of the secondary cities, which you're working on, that was a national level initiative. Okay. So the way that's applied then must then take into consideration the interests of all the different levels under it.
And maybe to follow up on that, how do they make the decision to say, okay, for this kind of intervention. We just decide from the country level, at the policy level, we said we need to go this way. Do they do sort of consultations, or are there some preliminary research done to understand the need on the ground, or they just think this is what we have to do? I'm just for curiosity.
It depends on the actual problem that they're trying to solve in that context. If it's something to do with housing, for an example, that would start at a village level. You look at a given area and see what kind of housing issue that they're facing, and then determine what kind of houses would be most suitable for them, depending on the area that they live in. If it's something to do with, say, environmental conservation, then that again would be a more regional, national approach, which then works its way downwards. So it depends on the actual issue that you're considering.
Okay, thank you very much for that one. We also have a question for Lavinia, which says, with regards to the challenge of taking action and moving beyond thinking about the system and the people's needs, how do you think about descaling and de-risking so that small interventions or experiments can be tried? And how might we guide the approach to more active participation and learning by doing?
Yeah, thank you. That's an interesting question. I think this is why the need for the design part of it, right? To include a bit of the design, because design is very much action oriented. But I think without understanding the environment in which you're designing something, then we sort of go about designing the wrong thing. So I think what the design process does, I'm not sure I'm familiar with it, but you are with it, but it's very much, we move with teams from a point of understanding through to finding out what the needs are, and then very much reframing the problem and then checking in. And I think this speaks to the other comments as well, is about how much do you engage. And this is where in between the design process, you would engage with the people that are relevant to this challenge. And then you develop something, then you develop it early and quickly so that you don't spend a lot. And you come up with an initial design. And that isn't necessarily a product just yet. It could be a story. It could be a storyboard. It could be just a prototype. And that is quite quick. And then you test that. And then we iterate and we go back and see how we can improve that. And then that's how we quickly have something tangible, which has been the problem with the systems thinking part, is moving into that tangible thing. And with design, you're already pushed to get into that tangible thing. But then you keep iterating, and with iterations you keep improving your product. But the systems part needs to come in, because it isn't there, to ensure what you're designing can actually be embedded in society. And just to speak to the other comment, it was, I think the citizen engagement is not enough, actually. To explicitly, it's not, because in the design process you bring users in only once or twice, but with systems you need to think about the actual citizens in the wider society, and how do you engage them, and at which part of it do you bring them in to this process. Is it a co-creative process that you do with them? And then you start to think about who is actually doing this process. If I'm the facilitator or the coach, who's the person designing the thing or building the thing? So yes, I agree. There's definitely a need for more engaging, but to find a way to bring society in on that. Yeah. I actually don't know enough about agile project management, so I don't know. Perhaps, maybe not.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any other questions that you would like to ask? Please just unmute yourself. I think we really want to just have a conversation with us engaging with the concepts and the topics. So please, if there are any questions, please unmute yourself and you can ask away.
Yes, Sheldon, there's a question from Oleg about whether we considered citizen engagement. I think that's a question to both of us. Yes, in this particular project, that's something that we've been doing. We've been holding town hall meetings in each area that you go to try, of course, to engage with the citizens, get to know what kind of issues they're facing, get from them what their belief that the establishment of a city management office would, what kind of changes that would bring in their daily experiences. But yes, I mean, in projects like this, unfortunately, there's always a time constraint. So it's you can't spend so much time. You just have at most a week in every area to engage with the citizens, but that may not afford you enough time to understand at a much deeper level what kind of issues they go through on a daily basis. Yeah, so that's a problem. That's a major issue with such projects. That would, of course, require much more time to implement. But yes, there was a level of citizen engagement that we went through. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis.
Okay, I think I have a final question if nobody has, and this is really to Dennis. So feasibility and innovation are sort of both crucial, I think, aspects of design and systems thinking, right? So on the one hand, feasibility assesses the technical ability to deliver solutions, right? So can we do this? While on the other hand, innovation drives that sort of systemic transformative change and breakthrough ideas. So I wanted to know from your experience, do you find that implementers often struggle to balance between feasibility and innovation? Can these two sort of elements coexist harmoniously? And what strategies could you maybe sort of incorporate to ensure that, they are sort of both integrated into projects?
Oh, okay, it's an interesting one. It's feasibility would, or depending again on the complexity of the issue that you're considering. Feasibility may mean that something that maybe at the outset appears like it may not be done, but if you look at the wider system, you could then engage other levels, other development partners, for example, in this case, that will then help you acquire resources that you may not have, and therefore change what initially might have not appeared feasible and make it feasible. But of course, that then has to be balanced with what is desirable and what is viable. So in short, to answer your question, it's about balancing all those needs and looking at what is the best approach to take in implementing a given intervention. Again, considering, as in the case that you're working on, the benefits that would accrue to each of those levels, and of course the effect that in terms of environment, social inclusion, etc., that it would also have on the different levels of society. So it's a question of balancing, yes, those interests.
Interesting. Okay, thank you. Lavinia is also, as we close off, saying, makes us think who should be the designer rather? Should citizens be more involved in what is designed, especially especially as they are the end users at the end of the day? So that's an interesting one. So Riva is saying everybody's a designer.
Yeah, definitely agree.
All right. So as we close off, any other questions or comments or contributions? before we give you the rest of your time, less than a minute. Any
Less
questions?
less than a minute. Only maybe if I mean, internet connection is a true problem in Africa. And so I was wondering if the digital divide has been taken, because if we want to actually divert the youth from the mega cities and have a more, let's say, distributed occupation of the land, even to push agriculture and so forth. The really now having a good internet connection, it's a must, because a young lady or a young man will never go somewhere where there is no connection. So my question is if it has been considered.
So to who is this
Well,
directed to?
mainly to Dennis, obviously, because his
Okay.
project is about I'm creating a new center to attract the youth.
Okay, thanks, Oleg. Yes, connectivity in the rural areas in most part of Africa is still a problem, but it's not as bad as it used to be, say, 5 years ago. I live in, I am from Kenya, and in Kenya, for an example, right now there's internet coverage across most of the country. But of course, there's also the question of affordability. Okay, it may be available, but people cannot afford it. So that's then an issue that needs to be addressed. But in Rwanda, again, it's what the intention of the government by setting up those secondary cities is to increase the level of urbanization. Now, Rwanda as a country is it's also referred to as the country of 1,000 hills. So it's mostly made up of mountains and hills. So the arable land in Rwanda is very limited. So the intention then is to bring people as much as possible to the urban areas and then free up, of course, the rural areas for agriculture. Now, one benefit of that is that within the urban centers, connectivity is much better developed. Okay, but of course, affordability still is an issue. So that's the affordability issue is something that needs to be addressed, of course, by either creating jobs through some means that would then make it, or subsidizing the cost of internet connection, internet access. Yes, so that may be another intervention that needs to be taken, at least to encourage the youth to adopt digital economy, which then, of course, would help them to do other things. So yes, there are two issues that need to be identified and addressed, especially the one of affordability. But access is something that's become less of a problem compared to what it was 5 years ago.
Thank you. If you're interested, with my foundation, we are promoting a new model, which is the social ISP, which is not in concurrence with the commercial telecom operators, but is been designed specifically for communities and disadvantaged areas, and the cost is very low, and the quality is good. So maybe we can have I will contact you maybe on LinkedIn.
I will. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Closing off with a very good and important topic on access to internet and its opportunities. So I would like to also just quickly say thank you to the panelists, both Dennis and Lavinia, for joining us. Really, it was really insightful and valuable. All of the information that you have shared today with the team and everybody on the call. Also to everybody who joined us today, thank you very much for sort of coming back and listening to us, and I hope it really adds value to you at the end of the day. So we are a hub, right? So we do have a community hub on the called the SI Cape Town Hub. We do have regular sessions similar to these. So please join our spaces to ensure that you do not miss out on any of these interesting events that we sort of will regularly host. So without wasting too much time, thank you again once again, and have a good rest of the day to everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Yeah, thanks, Sheldon.
Goodbye.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.
Bye.